Okay. Hello, everybody. Oh, I can hear myself. Good. Mic's working. I'm Kathleen McMahon, and I'm here today to talk to you about how you can flavor your React components with accessibility seasonings to make your design system delicious. But before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. My slide deck will be posted up here. After my talk, I'll have a specific URL later on because I have a bunch of all my slides up there from my other presentations. And these are my social links. And here, mostly on Twitter, by the way. And here's an outline of what we'll be covering today. Yes, I have an agenda. So the topics we're going to cover today, I'm going to bring my notes up bigger because I am there. I need to see. The topics we're going to cover today are why accessible components, your design system. It's a cookbook, design systems, and React. We're going to go over some patterns for icons, buttons, inputs, documentation, and if we have a little time, I might do a little bit of a demo, so I'm hoping I have some time to do that. So let's back up for a bit so I can introduce myself better. I am the tech lead for O'Reilly Media's design system, and it's an internal open source project. And I race bikes very badly. I race cyclocross, if anyone's ever heard of cyclocross. I also manage a social media campaign called Cross Sisters, trying to get more women racing cyclocross. I hand out a lot of stickers and buttons to everyone that I can find. But mostly you will see me at the back of the pack, your favorite Lantern Rouge, racing 2 laps to your 6 on a single speed, wearing costumes. Because who doesn't love a clown? Well, maybe not this clown. So, one thing I forgot to mention, I'm a dev dinosaur. So I remember when computers looked like this and software looked like this, and we stored stuff on these, and we looked up information on these. This was the newest hotness. And this was our stack, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Fast forward to now, and the industry is moving at a really fast pace. And you need to adapt quickly to keep up. It's a bit of a fire hose of information. It can get a bit overwhelming, and you can start feeling like panicky Natalie Portman sobbing in a corner because you're wondering if you're relevant. But I say that dinosaurs are always, always the hotness. So, those old school HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility skills, they're highly valuable and they're transferable, no matter which framework you use. So those skills will give you an edge in the industry where the div has become the reluctant king. So why accessible components? And also, why should we care? So our users are diverse, and they are varied, and they access our page in many ways. So, for example, users can have different motor skills, cognitive skills, sensory skills, speak a different language. Maybe trying to access your site on a very low bandwidth connection. All of these can be temporary, permanent, or situational. Like a permanent situation is if you're blind. Temporary is what if you're looking at your screen in the bright sunlight. Same thing with hearing. Maybe you can't hear at all. Or what if you're on a subway, on a train, and you're trying to listen to something. Same thing with motor. Maybe you lost an arm. Maybe you broke an arm. Maybe you're holding a baby and trying to check for the latest stats on your phone. So there's all these things that we need to think of when we are creating our apps. And our users will access our content using things like desktop, mobile, screen readers, screen magnification software, a mouse and a trackpad, standard Braille and Morse code keyboards, straw devices, switch controls like a paddle that allows you to hit tab and return, and voice assistants, think Alexa, Google Home. Those are coming online right now. The W3C has developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are a set of guidelines to help us make our apps accessible. It's called WCAG for short, WCAG. There are 3 levels of conformance: single A, which is the bare minimum, double A, which is the gold standard in the industry, and triple A, which is the holy grail. Very hard to achieve. So double A is awesome if you can get it. Triple A is amazing. We have 4 principles of accessibility to consider with our apps. Our apps need to be perceivable. Information and the UI components must be presentable to users in ways that they can perceive. It needs to be operable. You need to be able to operate and navigate on that page in many ways. The information needs to be understandable, and information needs to be robust and adapt to different situations. The easiest way to think of these 4 principles is pour yourself some coffee, P-O-U-R, or an espresso because yum. But we have these standards, we have these principles to follow, and yet we don't want to leave our users behind, but we are. In February of 2019, WebAIM, this organization that does a lot of things with accessibility, did this study called the WebAIM Million, and they audited the 1 million most popular websites, just the home pages of the top 1 million home pages. And the results that they did, this is just an automated check of just finding just automated errors that you can find with like an accessibility linter. This is the results. 97.8% of home pages had detectable WCAG 2 failures. 59% of 3.4 million form inputs were not labeled. 60.1% of those million pages had ARIA present, unnecessary ARIA. And of those pages, there were 26.7 more detectable errors on average than home pages without using ARIA. So, 6 months later, WebAIM did a re-audit just to see if things got better. So, what do you think? Close? Oh, yeah, I love you. Okay, so this is the number. So ARIA present on 60.1% of pages in February. In August, 64.5%. So the amount of ARIA increased. Like everyone just started shoving ARIA at it. Yikes. So developers, they have good intentions, and so they want to do the right thing, but they made the accessibility of the pages worse because they're implementing things incorrectly. But imagine if you had accessibility baked into components that you could use. So your developers, can do their jobs. Also, I want to go back for a second. So another thing that's important about a design system, well, we'll get into that in a minute. I digress. So we want accessibility baked into components, but what is a design system? So Isha did a really good job about talking about design systems earlier in the day, and I'll paraphrase this quote from this Envision blog post about a guide to design systems. So a design system is a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. So, and also, I say that great design systems combine team and consumer experience. Because everyone wants to hear developer experience. Make it great for the developer. This is awesome. Make it easier for the developers to do their work. But if you're making great design system, great products, what about those end users? That's what you really need to think about, is like, are you making something that is going to be usable in the end? So a good design system could be okay, but if you combine team and consumer experience, that's a great design system. So I like to say your design system is a cookbook. And your cookbooks have a personality. My mom is a serious fan of cooking, and lately I've been enjoying digging into the cookbooks she's collected over the years. And I like to read how recipes have evolved over time, and because the pictures are really cool. So if you take a look at some of the cookbooks published in the 1940s through 60s, she's collected a lot and inherited a lot. And if you look past the outdated views on women, you'll find some interesting recipes, questionable food combinations, like Jell-O and meat. I saw, wow, yes, I went there. I promise I won't make that for you. But there's also an impressive level of detail paid to the structure of every single part of the cooking process. I mean, look, there's like an encyclopedia on how to set a table and entertain people. That's detail, a level of detail, and that's very similar to how a design system works. So what does that have to do with React? So there's always some debate about how when you use a framework, you're going to make inaccessible apps, and that's a problem. But if you look at React's docs, React fully supports building accessible websites by using standard HTML, CSS techniques. So I like to say React is a kitchen utensil, but it's not the only utensil in your kitchen. You are the cook. So in my opinion, it's up to the developer to have that standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility best practices and fundamentals to know how to be able to leverage a utensil correctly, and that includes React. So that said, if your developers are unsure how to start building inclusively, empower them with your design system. Build some features into your components that help them along. So your components are your tried and true recipes. And WCAG is your reference material. If anyone's looked at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and you try to read it, your eyes would bleed because there's just so much information to look at and understand. So think of it as a reference. But creating a component is like following a recipe. You first start off with high quality ingredients, that's your semantic HTML. You mix in some key seasoning, just a touch of ARIA. I'll be sharing some articles in my my posted presentation, and one of them is a really great article by Eric Bailey. This is ARIA is spackle, it is not rebar. That's part of that whole problem with ARIA. So, light touch of ARIA. You also follow directions, that's your documentation. And then you read the helpful hints. Those are your best practices. So let's take this model and apply it to some components. Let's talk icons. So icons are a great way to add a bit of flourish to your product. They supplement key messaging, and they call attention to areas of importance on the page. Icons can be either informative or decorative. Informative icons need alternative text to be perceived by assistive technology. Decorative icons don't add a significant value. They're more like a flourish. They need to be hidden from assistive technology. There is more than one way to make an accessible icon. The two most recent and popular ways are using SVGs and icon fonts. So you'll always hear SVGs are the new hotness, and I agree, they are great. We initially used SVGs in our design system. We combined them all into a sprite sheet, and everything was great until we started testing, and we discovered a voiceover bug in High Sierra, which is now fixed, but we had to move on and plan for SVGs later, so cried in the corner a little bit. And so for a temporary solution, we decided to use the tried and true icon font technique for now until we plan to refactor everything to use SVGs in the future. So icon fonts to the rescue. Let's go over an example of how you can make an accessible icon font using semantic HTML and the icon font technique. So this is what you'll typically see as an icon font element in the wild, but it's not accessible. This is an accessible icon pattern. Let's break it down. So you begin with a span element, and that adds a CSS class to attach the icon font family to add some baseline styling to the span. We also add a separate class to the span and assign the exact icon we want to attach to the span. And it uses a pseudo element to attach content before the DOM element. We also need to add a second span in here to pair it with descriptive text. And we wrap the entire thing with a third span, and I'm using spans for a reason. I'll tell you why later. So we add a wrapping span around the two child spans and use a CSS class to convert that span from its native display inline property to display inline block, because display inline only allows you to adjust the margin and padding on the left and the right, and display inline block allows you to control the margin and padding all the way around the element. So this is important, and also using spans is important when we compose this component into other components. So moving on, we are going to add a class to the descriptive text called visually hidden, and this is a common pattern where we visually hide the text from sighted users, but we keep it exposed to anyone accessing the page on screen readers. That's giving you text for context for this icon. So this is a high quality icon component, and it is accessible. But if you pop this into a screen reader, and we'll do this later if we have time, the screen reader will announce /F12F email. So even though this, this markup is using high quality ingredients, we need to do mix in a couple more things to make it better. So it's time to mix in a couple key accessibility spices. So 1, we're gonna add a pinch of ARIA hidden equals true to the span containing the icon font, and that will hide that font from announcing from screen readers. And then you won't hear those Unicode characters. And then we're gonna look at this again and go, all right, so this is now a pattern where it is more high quality. But is this icon informative or is it decorative? So if it's informative, icons should announce when they're informative, so we don't change this pattern at all. But if this icon is decorative, on the wrapper span, we need to add another pinch of ARIA hidden there to make sure the entire grouping inside this element does not announce to screen readers. So that's the HTML syntax. Let's convert that to JSX. You convert class to class name, and you self-close those spans, and you change that true to a Boolean, and you have a semantic and accessible component. And what's really interesting I learned about React components, they have this list of like allowable properties that are in HTML that are Boolean properties that they know are going to render as true or false as strings under the when it renders into the DOM. So they have this list, and so you can pass in true to these certain known elements, and it will render to a string for you under the hood. So you don't have to like do anything in your components to like render certain properties. So it's pretty cool. So let's make this component a little more flexible, because this is now on JSX. First, we want to support some incoming props. So we want to support whether we want to hide or show the icon, what icon name we want to use, and any descriptive text we want to pass in. And the more important thing we need to do here is add some guardrails. So this is important for any of the devs that are new to accessibility, not really sure what to do, and this helps them stay in their lane to make sure they're using those features that you've mixed in for them. So the first guardrail we've added here is the icon naming guardrail. So if someone passes in an icon, the name for icon, we do a check to see if that icon exists in our library. If it doesn't exist, it throws an error. And I've gotten so many people like, well, there's this error. It's like, yes, that's on purpose. You're trying to pass in something that doesn't exist. So that's a safeguard there. Also, we are at the bottom in the right there, you see that it's also the name of the icon is passing in as a descriptive text. So, which brings me to the second guardrail. If a person does not pass in that icon title, the icon name announces as a fallback. So you're guaranteed that something will announce. The last one we add is the hidden prop. And so this is an interesting pattern because ARIA hidden in the DOM. So what this does is if someone passes in icon hidden to this component, it will keep the component from announcing. So it's great for decorative components, decorative icons. If it's not passed in, it will always announce. Why I'm using a true or null pattern here is because under the hood, when you render an element and you use ARIA hidden on it, there's no ARIA hidden false. There is ARIA hidden true or not at all, just like when you do a disabled attribute or a hidden attribute on an element. These are one of those elements on HTML where we only want the ARIA hidden to hit true if icon hidden is passed in. If it hits null, that whole attribute doesn't even attach to the icon, so it keeps it really clean. And what's great about this is, and there's another reason why we do this is because some of the old screen readers, if you passed in false, they would still announce it as true. So you just want to do a true or null pattern for certain components that use this, like put it on or not even attach it attributes. So with that, let's move on to buttons a bit and compose some things together. So buttons, they perform an action on the page. They should look and act like a button. If you're using a button to go to a different page, use a link, because that's what a link is for. Use semantic HTML. You get screen reader and keyboard support for free by using a button element. It's all the work has been done by the browser specs to get this working for you. So let's start off with high quality HTML. There it is. There is an accessible button. There's the button element. And our designer has provided us some interactive focus states for hover, focus, active, and disabled. And also the colors will pass color contrast for text over backgrounds, and for the interactive control borders over the background, there's certain rules for that. We're making sure we're leveraging the pseudo classes so it attaches with the CSS, because CSS is awesome. But then now we have to, this is the one thing we need to add to our button for ARIA is the ARIA label. We need to support that. Say you have 5 read more buttons on the page. You're like rendering something, you have 5 cards, and each of them say read more. If you're accessing this page with a screen reader, and sometimes screen readers, they will access, like on voice over other devices, and they will just scan all the links on the page, and they'll hear read more, read more, read more, read more, read more. Read more about what? So what's great about this label is it will override the text that is announced from the button, so you can give some more context. You can pass in read more about dinosaurs. So when someone's scanning the page with a screen reader, they know what the button is going to do. Also, so this is our accessible button in HTML, and there it is in JSX. Just change one prop. Now, if we want to add icon support, we pop in our icon here, and we set our icon hidden to true. We never wanted to announce because we can use other things to give more context here. But we also want to support that icon name prop. But what's great about this, we can also support children, and we're going to wrap the contents of the children icons so they sit next to each other in another span, and we're going to set that to, we can use flexbox there. What's great about this is we're using spans, because inside a button element, you have to use an inline element. You can't use block level elements. You can't use divs. You can't use other buttons. That's just not valid HTML. You can't use links. Spans are great. Spans are inline. They work really well, and you can position things nicely and not break your HTML. So that's why we built the icons with spans. So this JSX is popped into the components render method, and we add some prop supports. We're going to support ARIA label, the children, whether we want the button to be disabled. So taken out of the screen reader flow and not clickable. And we want to support an on-click function for any function you want it to do. We're not going to tell you what function to do. This is a presentational component, so we're going to support a function that you want to pass in. So there we're going to use that true or null pattern, because disabled is a add it or remove it completely attribute in HTML. And here's our guardrail. So if you're going to use, if you don't pass in an icon name into this, for the icon, you don't get an icon in your button. So it's just a nice quick little guardrail that you'll still get the other text if you pass in the text, but you will not get that icon unless you pass in a name. Moving on to inputs. So inputs, they need labels and error messages, because labeled inputs give users more context. If you don't have a label, the user will not know what this input means, what it's for. Placeholders are not labels. So avoid using them instead of labels, because someone's going to click into that input and they're going to type, and they're like, what was this for? Hit backspace. Type again. Use the label and make screen readers happy too. And they're hard to scale across browsers, and they don't auto-translate. So don't rely on those. I have more articles on that about placeholders. We also want to make sure that your inputs are not too wide, so you don't force the users to scroll horizontally. And you want to keep your labels and your error messages in your inputs stacked vertically above and below the input, usually in the same place. And I'm going to try to demo this later, is when you have a user that's relying on a screen magnifier, they'll see like a credit card size window on their desktop. And if they're scanning around the page and all they see is like these 2 lines and they don't see a label, it's like, what is this about? But if the label and the error message are in that same place, always know the context of what that input's about. So you're helping your users use your forms. So this is an accessible label pattern. A little small, huh? So let's be kind and let's magnify it and use some HTML. This is a semantic HTML pattern for a label. You pair a label with the input, and you have an error message below. This is your high quality HTML. But inputs need those labels and error messages. This is how they look in HTML. You use a for attribute, and that for attribute will pair with the ID. It's the same name as that ID, so it knows to attach which label goes with which input. And we'll talk about attaching that error text to make it screen reader announceable in a minute. But this is how you do it in React. So in HTML, you're using a for attribute and you're attaching it with the ID. And before I get to that, we're also adding some validation. So we're going to add supporting whether the input's invalid or whether it's required. And we're going to add an ARIA described by attribute. This is just the minimum amount of ARIA attributes that we need here. The ARIA described by attribute that the value there is the same value as the error message. So it knows what to announce when there's an error. It will announce that, whoops, error message. But to do that, you add one more attribute, the ARIA live announcement, and that will, once the error hits, that whoops error will announce. So that is a way that you can make sure your error message, they show up and they also announce to a screen reader user. If you convert this to JSX, for is a reserved word, I believe, in React, so it's HTML4. And we convert class to class name. And we convert the disabled and the ARIA invalid and required to the new true or null pattern. The ARIA described by, we only want to attach it if it's an invalid and error message, because you want to make sure that the ID only attaches if it's invalid, otherwise it will throw an error. And we're going to support some synthetic events like onChange and onKeyPress. And then we're going to add our guardrails. No label, no input. Period. That will encourage developers to remember to always add those labels. And and the designer hasn't added it, throw it back to the designer. Need a label, please. If they don't pass in an icon, no icon. We also do the same thing for our error messages. If they don't pass in invalid and error handlers, you don't get the error message. So this is a great way to help guide everyone to develop accessibly. Now, documentation. Make your documentation expansive. Like Surya said in his presentation, if you have a package, because ours is a package that we have, a package of atoms that we provide for the other developers to use in their apps. They might have their own core components that they use that they consume our apps. If someone wants to use your design system package, your NPM package, put that in the documentation. Give them installation instructions. Make sure you're having examples of how the component can be used. Make sure it's straightforward to contribute. And give them guidance on whether the component belongs in the design system. Just because it's a one-off component doesn't mean it belongs. Maybe if 3 teams want to use it, that's a good candidate for a component that makes it into the design system. So we use these 3 tools at the moment because we like to explore. We use Gatsby, Storybook, and we deploy instances on Zeitz now to have some pages for documentation and some component examples. Now, what I'm going to try to do, let's see if I can do this. Yes. Okay. Stand by. So, yes. So, documentation. When getting started, things like here, give them information how to do things. You know, what you're doing if you're developing a new feature. Make sure there are contribution guidelines. Make sure there's like verifying that you have system access, all these types of things like that. So just give them give them lots of information about your component as I go around. Because we all talk about buttons. We're going to talk about buttons. Things like, your variations of your component. Ideally, you have that, copy-paste button like Yisha was mentioning. So they could just, copy the pattern and implement it. Also, make sure you have a props table. Give someone some information of what the prop it is, what type it is, what it's used for, if it's required. Now, moving back over for a second. Let's see if I can do this. Survey says it works. Okay, so the next thing is storybook. I'm going to talk about this really quickly. It's a great way to sandbox your components in isolation. So you can play with your UI logic just without messing with business logic. It's really, really great to test something in a small window of, clarity. And provide things like pattern gallery. I hope to have a couple examples there, because you could have an accessible component, but you also should show examples of how you can implement something accessibly or inaccessibly. So you have some guidance on how to use something, because you also have to use those it depends cases and think. It's not just like, here's a button, just use it. You also have to figure out the right way to use these buttons or other components correctly in your app. So I'm going to go back over here because I don't need to use my screenshots because everything's working. Here's just a quick look of like how we're working on. We have different buttons here. What's really nice about this, I just upgraded to Storybook 5.2, so it's still working. But what's really nice is it starts like putting everything in here, and it'll have codes and it'll have like prop tables. But if you look over here, you have all these little things you can do. You can look at things. You can set up breakpoints. You can see things like in full screen. Down here, you have all those add-ons. So here's the story. Let's see if my keyboard, yes, let's bring it up. Come on. Nope. It's not going to, there it is. All right. So here, you could see all your code examples, actions. Oh, look, click the button. I haven't played with knobs yet, but this one I love. This one you need. So accessibility. What's great about this is it will highlight, if it highlights correctly. There it is. This one has an accessibility violation. And what it's using under the hood is the Q's Axe engine, which is it's a browser extension. It's also a JavaScript package that you can integrate into your testing that will look through your apps and your components and test it against all the WCAG success criteria. And it will tell you how serious the error is and what you need to do to fix it, which is awesome. It also tells, things that have passed and all these other things. So it's really great. It's a great way to find that low-hanging fruit type of errors you can fix right now. And once you fix those, you are ready for the manual test, because you always have to manually test your components. Let me see which ones I want to show you really quickly. So I want to show you, because looking at time, yeah, we're good. Okay. I want to show you. So we have this disclosure widget we're working on right now. And what's really nice about disclosure widgets, on the upside, I'm not having it like any like Amazon things like popping up. So that's good. So we're going to put that away for now. But what's really nice about this is we have like a widget that opens and closes, right? And it's really nice because we made a pattern that is keyboard accessible and allows a developer to pass this in and style it their own way. It's a little more of a complex pattern where you can do some focus management. You can provide patterns and guidance for your developers. And then you can also show some patterns on how to, this is the example, and this is the styled example. So say if I'll get in here. So if I'm tabbing through this and the button has received focus, I hit return, go through here, and it'll go through all of them. What's really nice about this is it returns focus right back to the button. It has this nice focus management built in there for you. So you can provide these patterns for your developers, and it will help them make more accessible applications. So the last thing I'm going to try before I wrap up, yes, is, because we are in Safari, is I'm going to show you, this is inaccessible, this is accessible. These two are technically accessible, but one is missing context. So I'm going to demonstrate. Well, actually, before I do that, I want to show you one thing. I want you to see with inputs things like this is a really good tool where you can see how users that don't see color, it's called Daltonism. You can side by side see how sometimes when you rely on color just as context, you're leaving some users behind. So if you're ever testing things for color, Daltonism, I'll make sure I put that link in there. The other thing I want to see if I can spin up, I'm not sure if it's going to work in projection, but we're going to try. So I'm going to try to turn on the zoom feature so you can see what a person sees. So say we have this, right? And if, let me show this again. Okay, so if I use, I set it to picture in picture and I'm using these keys to, it works. So this is how someone will look at your page in screen zoom, and they can, they'll do this to start zooming into things if they have low vision. And so this is why it's important to have all your labels and your error message and labels in that same area, because if someone's relying on screen zoom like this, they might get lost. And that's one of the things that is not as reported in accessibility issues. A lot of screen magnification users don't report this. And also, reporting your disability is a privacy thing. You shouldn't require someone to report something that they feel is a private condition. So just be kind. But the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Safari, Storybook window, Keynote, React.js Day Verona 2019 Lake KMCMAHON window, Slide Navigator table, Safari, Storybook window, Storybook web content. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control Option Shift down arrow. Button. You are currently on a button inside of web content. To click this button, press Control Option Space.
Okay.
To exit this web area, press Control Option Shift up arrow.
This next one has an ARIA label.
Email me about React Yo button. You are currently on a button inside of web content.
Just add an ARIA label.
To click this button. You are currently on a button. Email me about React Yo.
Now here's another
button.
one. A button that has text.
You are currently on a button. Email me button. You are currently on a button inside of web content.
ARIA label here.
To click Email me about dinosaurs button. You are currently on a button. Email me about dinosaurs button.
Nice pronunciation.
But
this is what you can use with screen readers. It's like you can provide
press Control
context.
Option Space.
So if
to
someone
exit this web area,
can't
press
see the
Control
screen
Option
well,
Shift up arrow. Email. You are currently on a button inside of web content.
Sorry.
To click this button,
It's
press
really
Control
loud.
Option VoiceOver off.
There's also some other good tools that you can simulate blurring the screen, simulate macular degeneration, simulate floaters around your eyes. All these really cool things that you can test out to see how your apps are looking for all your users. But, which is great, is I can go, we don't need to talk about best practice because we just talked about those. But do's and don'ts, this is great. Always make sure you have do's and don'ts for each of your components. Something to, here's how to appropriately, use a button. Here's not a way to use a button. These are very important. Also, dedicate a page to accessibility resources. Make sure, WCAG it's difficult to parse. You can put a link to there, but also if you curate a bunch of articles that explain how to develop accessibly, design accessibly, you will make this a one-stop shop so the developers don't have to hunt and peck and find all the information. They'll have a place to do some research if they need it. So wrapping up, our users are diverse. Your design system's cookbook. Cookbooks have a personality. React is a kitchen utensil. You are the cook. Components are your tried and true recipes. Provide helpful hints in every one of your recipes. WCAG is your reference material. And document. Oh, and dinosaurs are always the hotness. Thank you for your time.